The Dragonborn is supposed to be Tamriel's ultimate trump card, a mortal blessed by Akatosh himself, born to rule, born to save the world. But across thousands of years of Elder Scrolls history, that blessing has destroyed nearly every single person who carried it, from emperors who reigned for days to ancient priests who sold their souls to Daedric princes. Today we're breaking down every Dragonborn who failed, fell, or was erased from history entirely, and we're starting with the one who won by losing everything, Martin Septim. Martin Septim is the most effective Dragonborn emperor in the history of Tamriel, and his reward for saving the world was becoming a statue that somebody probably smashed with a hammer 200 years later. Here's the thing, Martin wasn't supposed to be emperor. He wasn't even supposed to know he was a Septim. Born in 3E 389 as the illegitimate son of Uriel Septim VII, he spent his entire life as a priest of Akatosh in the chapel at Kvatch. No royal tutors, no throne room, no knowledge of his bloodline whatsoever, just a quiet man praying to a god who, as it turns out, had very specific plans for him. Then the mythic Dawn assassinated his father and all three of his half-brothers in a single night, and suddenly Martin went from obscure chapel priest nobody had ever heard of to the only living heir to the Ruby Throne. That's not a promotion. That's a death sentence with extra steps. And it gets worse. Before Martin could even process the fact that his entire family had been murdered by a Daedric cult, the city of Kvatch was invaded by oblivion itself. Gates literally tore open in the sky. Daedra poured through. The city burned. The chapel where Martin had spent his quiet, peaceful years was surrounded by hellfire. He survived, barely, because the player character happened to show up and carve a path through the chaos. Without that intervention, Martin Septim dies in Kvatch, and nobody ever knows the Septim bloodline had one last shot, but Martin does survive, and what follows is one of the most thankless hero arcs in Elder Scrolls history. He doesn't get to sit on the throne and rule. He doesn't get a coronation or a crown. He gets handed a checklist of apocalyptic errands. He needs the Amulet of Kings, which is currently in the hands of Mankar Cameron, the leader of the cult that killed his family. He needs the blood of a Daedric prince. He needs Daedric artifacts. He basically needs to assemble the most dangerous shopping list in Tamriel while Mehrunes Dagon is actively trying to break into the mortal plane and destroy everything. And Martin does all of it. He figures out the ritual, he pieces together the Mysterium Xarxes, he works through every impossible requirement. Then, when Mehrunes Dagon himself physically manifests in the Imperial City, a literal skyscraper-sized Daedric prince stomping through the streets, Martin shatters the Amulet of Kings, merges with the spirit of Akatosh, transforms into a giant flaming dragon avatar, and banishes Dagon back to oblivion. Cool, incredible, world saved, and then he turns to stone, permanently. The Septim bloodline ends right there, frozen in the Temple of the One as a dragon statue. Martin saved literally everything and paid for it with his existence. Not just his life, his entire being. No afterlife, no legacy beyond a chunk of rock in a temple. The Dragonfires went out forever, the Amulet of Kings was destroyed, and the empire he never got to rule spent the next 2 centuries slowly falling apart without him. Martin Septim is proof that being Dragonborn isn't a gift, it's a transaction, and the price is always you, Alessia. Every single person on this list exists because of her. Every betrayal, every sacrifice, every corrupted soul and broken dynasty, all of it traces back to one woman kneeling in the dirt, begging a god for help. Alessia was a slave, a Nedic woman born into Ayleid captivity during the early First Era, forced to live under elven masters who worshipped Daedra and treated humans like livestock. And she did what nobody thought was possible. She organized the first recorded human rebellion on Tamriel, rallied escaped slaves and Nordic warriors to her cause, and systematically dismantled the Ayleid city-states until she stood in the White Gold Tower as the first Empress of Men. Around 1E 243, the first Empire of Cyrodiil was born. But here's where it gets complicated. Alessia didn't just win a war, she struck a deal. The Alessian Covenant was a pact directly with Akatosh, the dragon god of time. Akatosh took a drop of his own blood, mingled it with hers, and handed her the Amulet of Kings. The terms were simple on paper. As long as her heirs sat on the Ruby Throne and kept the Dragonfires lit, the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion would hold. Daedric princes couldn't physically invade. Humanity was safe. Sounds like a victory, right? It was, for everyone except Alessia, because the fine print on that covenant was brutal. She didn't just pledge her life, she pledged her soul, she pledged her bloodline, she pledged every future emperor who would ever carry her dragon blood, and when she died around 1E 266, barely 2 decades into her reign, her soul didn't pass on. It was locked into the covenant itself, held in metaphysical escrow, unable to rest until the pact was fulfilled or dissolved. That dissolution didn't come for thousands of years. Not until Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings at the end of the Third Era did Alessia's soul finally get released. Thousands of years. She also built the religion that would dominate Tamriel for eras. The Eight Divines wasn't some pure spiritual revelation. It was a political compromise. Alessia deliberately fused Nordic worship traditions with Ayleid et Ada beliefs to pacify her conquered subjects and hold her fragile empire together. A theological rebrand designed to keep the peace, which, worked. But it also buried whatever her people actually believed under layers years of diplomatic theology that nobody would ever untangle. And that's the thing about Alessia. Her failure wasn't a failure at all. It was her success metastasizing. She freed her people but imprisoned her own soul. She created a covenant that protected the world but chained every Dragonborn emperor after her to a burden they didn't choose. Every name on this list, every tragedy we're going to cover, is someone paying interest on a debt Alessia signed in the First Era. She is the architect of the Dragonborn curse, and she bore its cost longer than anyone. But if you think the weight of that covenant crushed Alessia, wait until you see what it did to the last emperor who tried to carry it, Uriel Septim. 7. Most Dragonborn on this list go out fighting, screaming, or clawing at some impossible destiny. Uriel Septim VII walked into his death like he was keeping a dinner reservation. This man ruled Tamriel for 65 years. 65. That's longer than most people in the Wasteland survive, period. He navigated assassination plots, political betrayals, regional wars, and an entire decade where he wasn't even on his own throne. For 10 straight years, Uriel was imprisoned in a pocket dimension of oblivion while his imperial battle mage, Jaeger Tharn, wore his face and ran the empire into the ground. 10 years of watching someone else destroy everything you built. And when he finally gets rescued, he doesn't crumble, he doesn't abdicate, he just gets back to work. And none of it mattered. He survived everything the world threw at him, every scheme, every war, every betrayal. And in the end, the Mythic Dawn just waited him out. Mehrunes Dagon's cult didn't need to outfight him. They just needed him standing in a sewer at the wrong moment. His sons, Geldal, Enman, Ebel, all assassinated the same night. His entire bloodline erased in a single coordinated strike. Decades of careful dynasty management gone before breakfast. But here's where Uriel becomes something more than just another dead emperor. He knew, not suspected, not feared, knew. The man had prophetic dreams for years telling him exactly how this ended. He saw his own death. He saw his sons' deaths. He understood that the Dragonborn bloodline wasn't a reward from Akatosh, but a very long fuse attached to a very large bomb. And his response to all of this foreknowledge was to calmly walk through the Imperial City sewers, find a random prisoner he'd seen in his dreams, hand them the Amulet of Kings, and say, essentially, here, you're going to need this. I won't. Then he turned around and let the Mythic Dawn kill him. No fighting, no dramatic last stand. The most powerful man on the continent accepted a knife in the dark like it was a scheduled appointment. His only act of agency in that final moment was making sure the amulet reached the right hands before his blood hit the floor. Dying gracefully and passing along jewelry. That was his contribution to saving the world. The cruel irony is that Uriel's entire life was preparation for a sacrifice he wouldn't even get to make himself. Martin, his illegitimate son he barely acknowledged, would be the one to shatter the amulet and become the avatar of Akatosh. Uriel just kept the seat warm. 65 years of keeping the seat warm so his secret bastard son could break the chair. His greatest act of kingship was dying on time. But if Uriel's story is about a Dragonborn who ran out of road, the next one is about a Dragonborn who built the road in the first place and still couldn't stop it from crumbling underneath him. Remen Cyrodiil has one of the most absurd origin stories in all of Elder Scrolls, and that's saying something for a franchise where a cat race gets high on moon sugar and calls it theology. According to legend, his mother laid herself upon the earth at the top of Sancor Tor, and the land of Cyrodiil itself fathered a child. The continent, the actual dirt, that was his dad. So right out of the gate, Raymond is operating on a level of divine nonsense that even Alessia didn't reach. He's not just blessed by the gods, he's supposedly born from the soil of Tamriel like some kind of mythic potato with a destiny. And for a while, that destiny looks completely unstoppable. In 1E 2703, the Akaviri invade Tamriel. Thousands of Tsaeshi warrior serpents pour across the northern border, carving through everything in their path. Riemann rallies the fractured Colovian and Nibonese armies, meets the invaders at Pale Pass, and wins. But here's the part that really sells the Dragonborn legend. The Akaviri don't just lose, they kneel. They reportedly sense the dragon blood radiating off Raymond so powerfully that they drop their weapons and beg to serve him. These are hardened invaders who crossed an ocean to conquer a continent, and they take one look at this guy and decide, actually, we work for you now. Raymond founds the Second Empire. He formalizes the Imperial Legions, initiates campaigns into Morrowind, and transforms the Akaviri Dragon Guard into an elite military force loyal to the throne. A Dragonborn emperor with divine origins, battlefield dominance, and an empire stretching across most of Tamriel. And then the Morag Tong stabs him to death. Not a dragon, not a Daedric prince. Assassins. Hired by the Akaviri potentate Versidue Shay, one of the very people whose ancestors knelt before Raymond's divine power and swore eternal loyalty. The entire Raymond bloodline is wiped out, and the empire he built is handed over to the same foreign administrators he absorbed into his court. The guys who bowed to his dragon blood just waited a few generations and then paid someone to remove it from circulation. Here's the thing about Raymond. His failure isn't dramatic, it's bureaucratic. He built an empire structurally dependent on vassals who had zero long-term loyalty to his bloodline. The Akaviri potentates didn't need to match his power or challenge his divine mandate. They just needed to outlast his usefulness and hire the right people, which is, not ideal when your entire claim to the throne is that the the continent personally fathered you. Remen is proof that being Dragonborn doesn't come with institutional protection. You can be born from the literal earth, make an army of foreign invaders fall to their knees with the sheer force of your blood, and still get killed by a contract killer because your imported court advisors decided the paperwork would be easier without you. The Dirt's kid, taken out by middle management. But if Raymond's story is a cautionary tale about misplaced trust, the next one is about what happens when Dragonborn ambition curdles into something far, far worse. Patima the Wolf Queen. Up until now, every failed Dragonborn we've covered has been, on some level, a victim. Patima Septim is not a victim. Patima Septim is the reason other people become victims. Born in 3E67 as a Septim princess, Patima was arguably the most brilliant political mind of her era. She married into the Throne of Solitude, sank roots in Skyrim, and spent decades building a web of alliances, blackmail, and military power across 3 provinces. She was playing 4D chess, while everyone else was learning checkers, and she poured every ounce of that intelligence into one goal, putting her son Uriel III on the imperial throne with herself as the real power behind it. This is the War of the Red Diamond. Patima challenged Empress Kintira II's legitimacy, declared her son the true heir, and launched a civil war that tore the empire apart starting in 3E120. Her argument was simple. Her blood was Septim blood. The dragon lineage ran through her, and she would prove it by force if nobody would acknowledge it by right. Here's where it gets complicated. Whether Patima actually carried a genuine Dragonborn soul is disputed. She was a Septim by birth, sure, but the metaphysical dragon soul, the thing that separates a Dragonborn emperor from a guy in a fancy chair, that's never confirmed. It didn't matter. She believed it, commanded loyalty on that basis, and built her entire identity around the idea that dragon blood entitled her family to rule. For a while, it worked. Her forces won battles. Her son sat on the ruby throne, the empire bent. Then it broke the other way. Uriel III was killed, and Patima's war collapsed. Did she surrender, negotiate, accept defeat like a reasonable person? No. She retreated to Solitude and held out under siege for years, the entire imperial military bearing down on one city, and she refused to give an inch. She died in 3E137, alone, surrounded by corpses and necromantic horrors, still insisting she was right, which is, not ideal. But here's the kicker. Dying didn't stop her. Patima's spirit persisted for centuries. By the time of Skyrim's events, nearly 500 years later, a cult of necromancers is actively trying to resurrect her beneath Solitude. Half a millennium of being dead, and she's still causing problems. The Dragonborn has to physically destroy her ghost to keep her from clawing back into the world. She wasn't just after power. She still believed the dragon blood entitled her to a second chance. The universe said no. She said, I don't care. That's what makes Patima the pivot point on this list. Every entry before her involves someone who failed despite good intentions or impossible circumstances. Patima had everything. The bloodline, the intelligence, the political skill, the military capacity. Instead of greatness, she chose vendetta. She directed every gift toward personal ambition, not toward the Covenant, not toward Tamriel, just toward proving she was owed a crown. She represents the corruption of the Dragonborn ideal through pure ego. The dragon blood, real or imagined, became nothing more than a justification for war, necromancy, and a refusal to let go that literally outlasted her own body. But if you think a dead woman who won't stay dead is bad, wait until you meet the man who stole an emperor's face and wore it for a decade, Jagar Tharn. Every other entry on this list is someone who had the dragon blood and wasted it, corrupted it, or lost it. Jagar Tharn never had it in the first place. He just put on the costume and nobody noticed for 10 years. Here's what happened. Tharn was the imperial battle mage, personal advisor to Emperor Uriel Septim VII, top of the food chain, magically speaking. And around 3E389, he decided that advising the most powerful man in Tamriel wasn't enough. He wanted to be the most powerful man in Tamriel, so he acquired the Staff of Chaos, used it to open a pocket dimension of oblivion, shoved the real emperor inside, and then used illusion magic to physically transform into Uriel Septim VII. Same face, same voice, same throne, and it worked. For 10 years, Jagar Tharn sat on the ruby throne wearing the face of a Dragonborn emperor, and the entire continent just went along with it. The Elder Council didn't catch on, the Blades didn't catch on. The provinces kept sending their taxes to a man who was, functionally, a warlock in a skin suit. He dismissed anyone who got too close, replaced key officials with Daedric minions disguised as mortals, and let the empire rot from the inside out. Provincial wars went unresolved, systems degraded. The whole thing slowly rusted while Tharn collected power and made backroom deals with Mehrunes Dagon. But here's the thing that makes Tharn more than just a villain. His success is an indictment of the entire Dragonborn system. The Alessian Covenant, the Amulet of Kings, the Dragonfires. All of it was supposed to guarantee that only a true Dragonborn could rule, that the gods themselves would ensure legitimacy. And yet one ambitious battle mage with decent illusion magic fooled everyone for a decade. No divine intervention, no Akatosh smiting the imposter, no amulet rejecting him, just silence from the heavens, while a fraud ran the empire into the ground. If nobody can tell the difference between a real Dragonborn emperor and a fake one for 10 years, how much of the divine mandate was ever real? Tharn didn't break the Covenant. He exposed shows that it might have always been more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. He was eventually destroyed by the Eternal Champion, who reassembled the Staff of Chaos and used it against him in 3E399, freeing Uriel from oblivion and ending the simulacrum. But the damage was done. A decade of institutional rot and provincial neglect had weakened the Empire so badly that it never fully recovered. The instability Tharn introduced directly contributed to the conditions that made the Oblivion Crisis possible a generation later. Tharn wasn't a corrupted Dragonborn. He was a con artist who recognized that Dragonborn legitimacy was the most valuable political asset in Tamriel, and he simply stole it. Treated the Sacred Covenant like a disguise he could put on and take off. And the scariest part isn't that he tried, it's that it worked for as long as it did. But if Tharn was a parasite feeding on the Dragonborn legacy, the next entry is something far worse. Someone who actually had the dragon blood, received the gift directly from Akatosh, and used it to betray everything the Dragonborn were supposed to stand for. Mira. Every Dragonborn we've talked about so far inherited a legacy. They were born into dynasties, handed amulets, told what to do with their gift. Miraak didn't inherit anything. He was the first, the original, and he used every ounce of that divine power to serve exactly one person, himself. Here's the thing about Miraak. He starts out as a dragon priest during the Merethic era, back when dragons literally ruled over mortals, and the cult existed to keep humans obedient. He's a servant, a glorified middle manager for flying gods. But then something happens that changes everything. He discovers he can absorb dragon souls, not learn about them, not study them, devour them. He becomes the first mortal in history to demonstrate that a Dragonborn could rip the essence out of a dragon and make it his own. And instead of using that revelation to liberate mankind from dragon tyranny, which would have been the noble play, he looks at this world-shattering ability and thinks, cool, how do I use this to be in charge instead? His rebellion against the dragons isn't a freedom fight, it's a hostile takeover. He kills and enslaves several of his former masters, not because they were oppressing humanity, but because they were above him on the org chart. The theological foundation of an entire civilization shattered, not for justice, but for ego, which is, not ideal. But here's where it gets dark. Miraak realizes the remaining dragons are going to destroy him for his betrayal, so he does what any rational, power-hungry maniac would do. He makes a deal with Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, the tentacle-covered embodiment of be careful what you wish for. Mora pulls him into Apocrypha, his infinite library realm of writhing pages and eldritch nightmares, right before the dragons can finish him off. And there Miraak stays, for thousands of years. Let that sink in. Thousands of years trapped in a dimension made of eyeballs and tentacles. Serving a Daedric prince he was absolutely convinced he could outsmart, his consciousness slowly fragmenting across eons of forced servitude to a being whose entire domain is designed to make you feel like you're learning everything while controlling nothing. Miraak walks into Apocrypha thinking he's using Mora. Mora lets him think that, for millennia. When the Dragonborn DLC rolls around, Miraak finally makes his move. He uses black books, and the Bend will shout to mentally enslave the people of Solstheim, forcing them to build monuments in his honor while he prepares to break free from Apocrypha entirely. He's not subtle about it either. He's stealing dragon souls from kills you make, showing up uninvited to flex on you, and generally acting like a man who's been stewing in resentment for 4,000 years, because he has been. But here's the kicker. In the final confrontation, when you fight Miraak in Apocrypha and bring him to his knees, he doesn't get a warrior's death. Hermaeus Mora manifests, impales him with tentacles, and casually announces that Miraak has outlived his usefulness. The Daedric prince he sold his soul to just throws him away. The second, Mankar Cameron. Every single person we've talked about so far had one thing in common. They were Dragonborn. Some wasted it, some twisted it, some got crushed by it, but they had it. Mankar Cameron? Nobody's even sure he qualified. He claimed descent from the Cameron dynasty of Valenwood, which, sure, that's a real bloodline, but calling yourself Dragonborn because of it is like claiming you're royalty because your last name is king. Most scholars treated the claim with open contempt, but Mankar didn't care what scholars thought because he wasn't building a political argument. He was building a religion. He wrote the commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, 4 volumes of dense, hallucinatory philosophy that basically said everything you know about Tamriel is a lie. The Aedra aren't benevolent gods, they're prison wardens. The Dragonborn Covenant isn't a gift, it's a chain. And the world itself isn't a creation. It's a stolen Daedric realm that Mehrunes Dagon has every right to reclaim. The Mythic Dawn weren't terrorists, they were liberators. And he didn't just write about it, he acted on every word. He founded the Mythic Dawn cult, assassinated Emperor Uriel Septim VII and all 3 of his sons, stole the Amulet of Kings, and kicked off the Oblivion Crisis. Gates to Oblivion tore open across Cyrodiil. Daedric armies poured through, cities burned, and Mankar watched it all from paradise, a personal realm of oblivion he'd created using the amulet itself. That last part still keeps lore communities arguing. The Amulet of Kings is supposed to reject anyone who isn't Dragonborn. It won't sit on the neck of a pretender. And yet, Mankar wore it comfortably, while using its power to sustain an entire pocket dimension of oblivion. So either the lore is wrong, the amulet has an undocumented loophole, or Mankar Cameron actually had Dragonborn dragon blood and chose to use it for the single worst possible purpose in history. He turned the most sacred object in the Dragonborn tradition into the battery for a Daedric pleasure prison. That's not just theft, that's a statement, but his entire theological revolution collapsed the moment the champion of Cyrodiil showed up. They walked into Paradise, killed him, and took the amulet back. Paradise fell the instant Mankar died, and then Martin Septim, a man who'd spent his whole life as an anonymous priest, shattered the amulet, merged with Akatosh, and drove Mehrunes Dagon back into oblivion with his bare hands. Mankar stole everything to rule a world he'd decided was a lie. Martin gave everything to save a world he'd barely known. One is remembered as a saint, the other is a cautionary tale about building an entire cosmology around your own ambition. And honestly, whether Mankar was actually Dragonborn doesn't even matter. The gates were real. The dead were real. He came closer to ending Tamriel than almost anyone in history, and he did it while possibly having zero legitimate claim to the power he wielded, which is either the most terrifying part of his story or the most pathetic. I genuinely can't decide. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.